Most people think honesty is easy, until it costs them everything. The old leather wallet rested in the middle of the cracked sidewalk, its polished surface glowing beneath the golden rays of a late Georgia afternoon. Cars rolled past without slowing, their tires humming over warm pavement, while a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass through the quiet neighborhood. 9-year-old Caleb Brooks stopped walking so suddenly that the loose sole of his worn sneaker folded beneath his foot. He looked up and down the empty street before carefully picking up the wallet with both hands, almost as though it belonged inside a museum instead of lying forgotten beside a mailbox. His stomach rumbled, reminding him he had skipped lunch again so his grandmother could have the last bowl of soup waiting back at their tiny house. For just a brief second, he wondered if whoever had lost the wallet would ever notice a few dollars missing. Then he slowly opened it, not searching for money, but hoping to find a name. His eyes widened. Neat stacks of $100 bills filled one side, thicker than anything he had ever imagined holding. Another child might have counted them. Caleb closed the wallet almost immediately. Nestled behind a clear plastic sleeve was a business card embossed with silver lettering. Jonathan Whitmore. Whitmore Freight Holdings. Beneath the name was an address nearly 5 miles away, across neighborhoods Caleb had never visited. He quietly slipped the card back into place and tightened his grip on the wallet. As he continued home, neighbors sitting on front porches noticed the expensive leather in his hands. One man chuckled and called out, "Looks like you found yourself a lucky day, kid." Another smiled and shrugged. Nobody loses that much money unless they can afford it. Caleb forced a polite smile but kept walking, his eyes fixed on the uneven sidewalk ahead. When he reached the small white house where peeling paint curled beneath the windows, his grandmother Evelyn was folding freshly washed towels by the open window. She noticed the worried look on his face before she noticed the wallet. Caleb quietly placed it on the kitchen table. She looked from the wallet to her grandson without speaking. Finally he whispered, "Grandma, if we had this money, we could fix the roof." Evelyn rested her weathered hand gently over his. Her tired eyes softened with pride rather than temptation. "Maybe we could," she answered softly. "But if it isn't ours, it can never become part of our blessing." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. Caleb nodded slowly. A decision settled inside him with surprising calm. He slipped the wallet carefully into his faded backpack, tied the loose lace on his patched sneaker, and stepped back onto the porch just as the evening sun began sinking behind the pine trees. 5 miles stretched between a poor boy and a stranger whose world could not have been more different. Caleb took his first step without knowing that by sunrise, it would not be the billionaire's missing wallet people would remember. It would be the boy who believed his character was worth more than every dollar inside it. The screen door creaked softly behind Caleb as he stepped into the cooling evening air, the faded backpack resting lightly against his shoulders while the weight inside seemed far heavier than leather and cash. The sky above Georgia had begun to glow with streaks of orange and lavender, and the first porch lights flickered on across the neighborhood. 5 miles did not sound impossible when someone said the number out loud, but Caleb knew every stretch of that road. He had walked parts of it before to help neighbors carry groceries or deliver newspapers during the summer. Never this far. Never alone. He adjusted the strap on his backpack and started down the narrow sidewalk with steady determination. Every few blocks the houses grew larger, their yards greener, their fences taller. The familiar sounds of children laughing outside modest homes slowly faded into the quiet hum of sprinklers watering perfect lawns. A city bus rolled past, stirring warm air around him before disappearing down the road. Caleb instinctively reached into his pocket for bus fare, then smiled to himself. He already knew there was nothing there. His grandmother had offered him the last $2. She kept folded inside an old recipe book, but he had gently pushed her hand back. She needed it more than he did. Walking cost nothing except time. Along the way, he passed a neighborhood convenience store where the smell of fresh pizza drifted through the open door. His stomach tightened again, reminding him that dinner would have to wait until he returned home. He paused only long enough to fill his small reusable water bottle from the drinking fountain outside before continuing forward. The wallet remained untouched inside his backpack. He never opened it again. He did not want the money tempting his thoughts. As daylight slowly surrendered to evening, traffic became lighter. A retired couple sitting on a front porch noticed the young boy walking alone. The woman called gently, asking whether he needed a ride. Caleb smiled politely and thanked her, explaining that he was delivering something important. The couple exchanged curious glances but respected his answer. Watching him continue on foot, the man quietly remarked, "That young fellow walks like he has somewhere he truly belongs." Caleb did not hear the words, but they seemed to follow him with the evening breeze. His patched sneakers scraped softly across concrete, each step wearing the loose sole a little thinner. Occasionally, he stopped to check the address printed on the business card, making sure he had not missed a turn. Street signs changed. Small houses became elegant estates hidden behind rows of oak trees and decorative stone walls. Luxury vehicles glided silently through wide entrances guarded by iron gates. Caleb had only seen neighborhoods like this on television. Everything appeared spotless, almost unreal. He finally reached the end of a long private drive where enormous wrought iron gates stood beneath stone pillars engraved with the name Whitmore Estate. Warm lights illuminated a mansion sitting far beyond the entrance, its windows glowing against the darkening sky. Caleb drew a slow breath, brushed the dust from his shirt with both hands, straightened his shoulders, and walked toward the security gate, unaware that the next few minutes would test not only his honesty, but also the dignity that had carried him every mile of the journey. Caleb stopped a few feet from the tall iron gate, his breathing slow as he looked beyond the stone pillars toward the mansion glowing beneath rows of warm lights. The property seemed to stretch forever, with perfectly trimmed hedges, quiet fountains, and a circular driveway wide enough to fit the entire street where he lived. Before he could press the small intercom button mounted beside the gate, a security guard stepped out of a nearby booth. The man wore a neatly pressed uniform and an earpiece that crackled softly in the evening silence. His eyes dropped immediately to Caleb's faded backpack, patched jeans, and dusty sneakers before returning to the boy's face. "Can I help you?" he asked politely, though his voice carried more caution than welcome. Caleb nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. I found something that belongs to Mr. Jonathan Whitmore. I came to return it." The guard raised an eyebrow. "You know Mr. Whitmore?" Caleb shook his head. "No, sir. I found his wallet this afternoon." The guard glanced toward the mansion, then back at Caleb. A faint smile crossed his face, the kind adults sometimes wore when they thought children had imagined something impossible. "That is quite a story," he replied. "Do you have an appointment?" Caleb answered honestly. "No, sir." "Did someone invite you?" "No, sir." The guard folded his arms. "Then how exactly were you planning to see one of the busiest businessmen in the state?" Caleb carefully removed the leather wallet from his backpack without opening it. He held it out with both hands. "I only wanted to give this back." The guard looked at the wallet but did not reach for it. "You can leave it with me." Caleb hesitated for the first time all evening. His grandmother had always taught him to return lost things directly whenever possible. "I promised myself I would hand it to him," he said quietly, "just so he knows everything is still inside." Another security officer, finishing his shift, wandered over and noticed the scene. After hearing a brief explanation, he chuckled softly. "That is some determination for a kid." The first guard sighed. "Mr. Whitmore has been in meetings since this afternoon. He is not available." Caleb looked down at the wallet for a long moment before lifting his eyes again. "I walked 5 miles to get here. I can wait if I need to." The guards exchanged another glance. There was no anger in the boy's voice, no impatience, only calm certainty. Minutes passed as evening settled over the estate. Crickets began singing beyond the stone walls while soft lights illuminated the long driveway. Caleb remained standing exactly where he was, holding the wallet with steady hands. Finally, the first guard spoke into his radio. "Please inform Mr. Whitmore's assistant that there is a young visitor at the front gate with an unusual request. He insists on returning something personally." A brief silence followed before a reply crackled through the speaker. The guard nodded once, then looked back at Caleb with a different expression, one touched by curiosity instead of doubt. "Stay right here," he said. "Someone is coming." Caleb quietly thanked him and waited beneath the warm glow of the entrance lights, unaware that every decision he had made since finding the wallet was about to reach the man whose life had unknowingly crossed his own only a few hours earlier. Several quiet minutes slipped by before the soft glow of headlights swept across the circular driveway. A sleek black sedan rolled toward the entrance and came to a smooth stop just inside the gate. One of the security guards straightened immediately while the other opened the vehicle door. Jonathan Whitmore stepped out with the measured confidence of a man who had spent decades making difficult decisions before sunrise and long after sunset. His charcoal suit was still perfectly pressed despite a full day of meetings, but the tired look in his eyes revealed a different story. He thanked his driver, adjusted the cuff of his jacket, and was halfway toward the front entrance when the first guard spoke. "Sir, I apologize for stopping you, but this young man insisted on seeing you personally." Jonathan glanced toward the gate. His attention settled on the small figure standing patiently beneath the entrance lights, a faded backpack resting on narrow shoulders and dusty sneakers that looked as though they had crossed half the county. For a brief moment, Jonathan assumed what he often encountered outside public events. Someone asking for financial help. Someone hoping for a donation. He walked closer, offering a polite but reserved smile. "Good evening, son. I hear you have been waiting for me." Caleb nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket, already expecting the conversation to move in a familiar direction. "I am sorry to keep you waiting. What can I do for you?" Instead of answering, Caleb carefully lifted the leather wallet with both hands and held it toward him. "I think this belongs to you, sir." Jonathan stopped mid-step. His expression changed instantly as he recognized the dark leather, the small scratch near one corner, and the silver initials pressed into the front. His hand froze in the air before slowly accepting the wallet. He looked from the wallet back to the boy, clearly surprised. "Where did you find this?" "Near a mailbox this afternoon, sir." Jonathan opened it almost instinctively. The familiar business cards remained in place. The folded receipts were exactly where he remembered leaving them. He thumbed carefully through the stack of cash, not because he doubted the boy, but because disbelief had momentarily overtaken reason. Every single bill remained untouched. He exhaled quietly, almost laughing at himself. "You walked all the way here just to return this?" Caleb nodded again. The address was inside. Jonathan looked beyond the gate toward the dark road stretching into the distance. "How far do you live from here?" "About 5 miles, sir." Jonathan blinked. "You walked 5 miles carrying a wallet full of money that was not yours?" Caleb lowered his eyes modestly. "My grandmother says that doing the right thing should never depend on how difficult it is." Those words lingered in the evening air long after the boy finished speaking. Neither security guard said a word. Even the gentle splash of the fountain seemed louder than before. Jonathan looked once more at the wallet resting in his hands before returning his gaze to Caleb. For the first time that evening, he truly saw the child standing before him. Not the worn clothes or the patched shoes, but the quiet confidence that no amount of wealth could purchase. The billionaire had expected to meet someone asking for help. Instead, he found himself standing before a young boy who had unknowingly given him something far more valuable than the wallet itself. Jonathan remained silent for several long seconds, his fingers still resting on the wallet as though it had suddenly become heavier than before. He had signed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars without hesitation, yet this simple exchange left him searching for words. The evening breeze stirred the oak trees lining the driveway, while the fountain continued its gentle rhythm behind them. Finally, Jonathan smiled, this time with genuine warmth instead of polite courtesy. "Thank you, Caleb," he said. "You have done something extraordinary tonight." Caleb shook his head modestly. "I only brought back what belonged to you, sir." Jonathan looked toward the mansion, then back to the tired young boy standing beneath the entrance lights. "Have you eaten dinner yet?" Caleb hesitated for a moment before answering honestly. "Not yet, sir. My grandmother is waiting for me." Jonathan immediately understood that the child was not asking for sympathy. He was simply answering a question. "Then at least allow me to have someone drive you home." Caleb smiled politely, but gently shook his head again. "Thank you, sir, but I promised Grandma I would walk back. She worries when plans change." The answer caught Jonathan off guard once more. Most adults would have accepted the ride without thinking twice. Caleb seemed to measure every decision against a promise he had made. Jonathan nodded with quiet respect. "Promises matter," he said softly. "They certainly do, sir," Caleb replied. As Caleb adjusted the strap of his faded backpack and prepared to leave, something white peeked out from one of the wallet's inner pockets. Jonathan frowned slightly. He did not remember placing anything there. Curious, he carefully unfolded the small sheet of notebook paper tucked behind one of his business cards. The handwriting was uneven, written in pencil by a careful young hand. It read, "I did not count your money because I did not want my eyes to think about keeping it. I only looked for your name so I could bring it back. I hope you are not worried anymore. Have a good night." From Caleb. Jonathan read the note twice, then a third time. His throat tightened unexpectedly. The security guards noticed the change in his expression but remained respectfully silent. Jonathan looked up just as Caleb reached the edge of the driveway. "Caleb." The boy turned immediately. Jonathan held up the folded note. "Did you write this?" Caleb nodded. "Yes, sir. I thought maybe you were looking for your wallet and feeling nervous. I wanted you to know everything was safe." Jonathan lowered his eyes to the paper once more. For years he had received handwritten letters from investors, politicians, executives, and community leaders. None of them had touched him the way a few simple sentences written with a pencil had. "You have given me more peace tonight than you probably realize," he said quietly. Caleb offered a gentle smile that reflected neither pride nor expectation. "I am glad, sir." With that, he waved politely and turned toward the dark road leading away from the estate. Jonathan remained standing beneath the lights, watching the small figure disappear beyond the gates. The wallet had been returned exactly as it was lost, yet something inside Jonathan Whitmore had shifted forever. He looked once more at the handwritten note, carefully folded it, placed it back inside the wallet, and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow morning, I am going to find that boy." Jonathan barely slept that night. Long after the lights inside the mansion had faded and the staff had quietly retired to their own quarters, he remained seated alone in his study. The leather wallet rested on the polished oak desk beside a crystal lamp, but it was not the wallet that held his attention. It was the folded sheet of notebook paper tucked safely inside. He unfolded it once again, smoothing the edges with unusual care. The pencil marks were simple, uneven, and impossible to mistake for anything rehearsed. They carried a sincerity that no polished speech or expensive presentation could imitate. Jonathan leaned back in his chair and stared through the wide windows overlooking the silent estate. During his career, he had built warehouses across the country, negotiated international contracts, and spoken before crowded conference halls filled with applause. Yet one quiet child had unsettled him with nothing more than honesty. He remembered the patched sneakers, the tired smile, and the respectful way Caleb had answered every question without expecting anything in return. Jonathan reached for his phone and called his executive assistant despite the late hour. When she answered, surprised to hear his voice, he spoke calmly. "Emily, I need you to postpone my first meeting tomorrow morning." There was a brief pause before she replied, "Of course, Mr. Whitmore. Is everything all right?" Jonathan glanced once more at the handwritten note. "I believe I have something more important to do." Early the next morning, the first rays of sunlight spread across the estate as birds filled the air with gentle songs. Jonathan was already dressed in a simple navy sweater and khaki pants instead of his usual tailored business suit. Emily arrived carrying a tablet filled with the day's schedule, only to find him standing beside a black sport utility vehicle instead of waiting in his office. She looked puzzled. "Where are we going?" Jonathan handed her the business card from his wallet with Caleb's handwritten note carefully tucked behind it. "We are going to find the boy who walked 5 miles because he believed doing the right thing mattered." Emily read the note in silence. Her expression softened almost immediately. "Do you know where he lives?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "Not yet, but I know where he found my wallet. We will start there." Less than an hour later, the vehicle rolled slowly through the modest neighborhood where the wallet had disappeared. Jonathan lowered the passenger window, studying every familiar street corner and weathered porch. The neighborhood looked nothing like the world he had left behind only minutes earlier. Small homes stood close together, bicycles rested in front yards, and neighbors greeted one another across white picket fences. Children waited at school bus stops with backpacks almost as large as themselves. Jonathan realized that although this part of town was only a short drive from his mansion, he had never once taken the time to see it. As the vehicle moved quietly along the same sidewalk Caleb had walked the day before, Jonathan found himself searching not only for a young boy, but also for the simple values that had somehow become easier to recognize in a child than in the powerful adults he met every day. The sport utility vehicle slowed to a crawl as Jonathan studied the quiet streets through the open window. Morning sunlight spilled across modest front yards where bicycles leaned against chain-link fences and flower pots rested beside worn wooden steps. Nothing about the neighborhood suggested wealth, yet everything reflected care. Fresh laundry fluttered gently on clotheslines. Neighbors waved to one another with easy smiles, and the smell of biscuits drifted from a nearby kitchen. Jonathan noticed Caleb's small figure long before Caleb noticed him. The boy was walking toward a corner grocery store carrying a folded paper bag and a gallon of milk, his backpack hanging from one shoulder, while the familiar patched sneakers scraped softly against the sidewalk. Jonathan motioned for the driver to stop without drawing attention. "Please wait here," he said quietly. Emily watched through the windshield as Jonathan stepped onto the sidewalk alone. Caleb looked up, surprised to see the familiar face from the previous evening. His eyes widened. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." Jonathan smiled warmly. "Good morning, Caleb. I hope I am not interrupting your morning." Caleb shook his head. "No, sir. I was just bringing breakfast home for my grandmother." Jonathan glanced at the simple groceries in the paper bag and nodded. "Would it be all right if I walked with you?" Caleb answered without hesitation. "Yes, sir." They continued side by side at the unhurried pace of two people who had no reason to rush. Jonathan noticed that Caleb greeted nearly everyone they passed. He waved to an elderly mail carrier, smiled at a crossing guard, and stopped briefly to help a neighbor pick up apples that had rolled from a reusable shopping bag. Each person thanked him by name. Jonathan quietly observed every small act. None of it appeared performed for attention. It was simply the way the boy moved through the world. A few minutes later, they reached a modest white house with peeling paint, a small porch swing, and flower boxes carefully tended despite their age. The roof showed signs of long overdue repairs, yet the yard was neatly trimmed and colorful wildflowers bordered the front walkway. Caleb opened the squeaky gate and turned back. "This is where I live, sir." Before Jonathan could respond, the front door opened and Evelyn Brooks stepped onto the porch. She paused for a brief moment after recognizing the distinguished visitor standing beside her grandson. Caleb walked up the steps first. "Grandma, this is Mr. Whitmore. I told you about him." Evelyn smiled with quiet dignity and extended her hand. "Welcome to our home, Mr. Whitmore." Jonathan accepted her handshake with genuine respect. "Thank you, Miss Brooks. I came because I wanted to meet the woman who raised a remarkable young man." Evelyn's eyes softened, though she simply replied, "I only tried to teach him that character stays with you longer than money ever will." Those words settled over the little porch like the morning sunlight itself. Jonathan looked from the weathered home to the smiling grandmother and then back to Caleb. Everything suddenly made sense. Honesty had not appeared in the boy by accident. It had been quietly planted, patiently nurtured, and faithfully lived every single day inside this humble home where love seemed far richer than anything money alone could ever build. Jonathan accepted Evelyn's invitation and stepped inside the modest house, removing his shoes at the front door without being asked. The living room was small but spotless. Family photographs filled the walls instead of expensive artwork, each frame carefully dusted and lovingly arranged. A hand-stitched quilt rested across an aging sofa, and the scent of fresh biscuits drifted from the kitchen. Everything inside reflected quiet pride rather than comfort. Purchased with money. Emily remained respectfully outside, giving the family privacy while Jonathan settled into a simple wooden chair at the kitchen table. Caleb placed the groceries on the counter as Evelyn poured 3 glasses of iced tea into mismatched glasses that had clearly been used for many years. Jonathan thanked her sincerely. He had attended elegant breakfasts in luxury hotels across the country, yet this humble kitchen felt warmer than many grand dining rooms he had known. His eyes wandered briefly toward the ceiling where a small bucket sat beneath a faint water stain. One window had been carefully sealed with clear plastic to keep out the winter drafts. None of it appeared neglected. It simply reflected a family that repaired what they could and appreciated what they had. Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket and removed an envelope he had prepared before leaving the estate. He gently placed it on the table and slid it toward Evelyn. "Please allow me to help," he said softly. "This is only a small way of thanking Caleb for what he did." Evelyn glanced at the envelope but did not touch it. Caleb looked from his grandmother to Jonathan without speaking. After a quiet moment, Evelyn folded her hands together and smiled kindly. Your gratitude means more to us than you know, Mr. Whitmore. But Caleb did not return your wallet hoping to receive something in exchange. Jonathan nodded respectfully. I understand that. This is not payment. It is simply my way of saying thank you. Caleb looked at the envelope for a brief second before lifting his eyes. Sir, if I had expected money, then I would not have been returning your wallet. I would have been selling my honesty. The words landed gently, yet they echoed through the little kitchen with remarkable weight. Jonathan lowered his gaze. No executive, advisor, or board member had ever spoken to him with such simple clarity. Evelyn reached across the table and rested her hand over Caleb's. We have always believed that kindness loses something precious when it comes with a price tag, she explained quietly. If you truly wish to honor what Caleb did, then remember how it made you feel and pass that feeling to someone else who needs it. Jonathan sat in thoughtful silence. Slowly, he picked up the unopened envelope and returned it to his pocket without the slightest trace of disappointment. Instead, a gentle smile spread across his face. I believe the two of you have given me a lesson that I should have learned many years ago, he admitted. Caleb smiled shyly and reached for another biscuit, while morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the worn wooden table where three people from completely different worlds shared something that neither wealth nor poverty could measure. For the first time in many years, Jonathan realized that true generosity was not about giving money away. Sometimes it began by learning when not to place a price on goodness. When Jonathan and Emily finally stepped back outside, the bright morning sun had climbed higher into the clear Georgia sky. Jonathan paused beside the small white fence and turned for one last look at the little house. Caleb was helping Evelyn water the flower boxes beneath the front window, laughing quietly as a tiny robin landed on the porch railing. The scene stayed with Jonathan long after the sport utility vehicle pulled away. During the drive back to the estate, he remained unusually quiet. Emily glanced over from the passenger seat. She had worked beside Jonathan for nearly 12 years and could often predict his next decision before he spoke. This time she could not. After several miles, Jonathan finally broke the silence. Emily, do you remember how many scholarship applications crossed my desk last year? She opened her tablet and answered immediately. More than 3,000, but most were reviewed by the foundation committee before reaching you. Jonathan nodded slowly. How many of those applications measured character instead of grades, awards, or family income? Emily hesitated. Very few, if any. Jonathan looked out the window as rows of oak trees slipped past. That is what has been missing. Back at the estate, he entered his study and placed Caleb's handwritten note beside a framed photograph of his late parents. He remembered his own father repeating the same lesson. Throughout his childhood, your reputation is built one honest choice at a time. Somewhere between board meetings, financial reports, and endless travel, Jonathan realized he had begun measuring success almost entirely by numbers. Caleb had reminded him that the greatest qualities rarely appeared on balance sheets. Late that afternoon, Jonathan asked Emily to arrange a simple visit to one of his company's neighborhood distribution centers the following week. No media, no announcements, no photographers. He wanted to spend time meeting employees and families whose stories usually remained invisible behind spreadsheets. Emily smiled quietly. She recognized that this request was unlike any Jonathan had made before. Meanwhile, across town, Caleb spent the afternoon helping a neighbor rake fallen leaves before returning home to finish his homework at the kitchen table. Nothing about his routine changed simply because he had met a billionaire. After dinner, Evelyn noticed him carefully polishing his worn sneakers with a soft cloth. Getting them ready for school tomorrow? She asked. Caleb smiled. Yes, Grandma. They still have a lot of walking left in them. Evelyn laughed gently. I believe they do. Neither of them knew that while they prepared for another ordinary school day, Jonathan was making plans of his own. He had decided not to surprise Caleb with money or expensive gifts. Instead, he wanted to discover what opportunities could truly change a young life without taking away the values that already made that life extraordinary. As evening settled over both neighborhoods, one humble and one grand, the same golden sunset painted the sky above them. Though miles still separated their homes, the distance between their worlds had quietly begun to disappear, carried not by wealth or status, but by a simple act of honesty that continued to ripple farther than either of them could yet imagine. Monday morning arrived wrapped in crisp autumn air as sunlight spilled across the red brick walls of Jefferson Elementary School. Children hurried across the front lawn carrying colorful backpacks, their laughter blending with the cheerful ringing of the first morning bell. Caleb walked through the front gate wearing the same carefully cleaned sneakers he had polished the night before. Although the faded fabric could not hide years of wear, they looked spotless. Evelyn had smiled proudly before he left home, reminding him that taking care of what you have is another form of gratitude. Caleb carried those words with him as naturally as his backpack. Inside the Whitmore estate, Jonathan finished reviewing a different kind of schedule. Emily entered his office carrying a folder prepared overnight. "Everything is ready," she said. "The principal has agreed to meet with you before classes begin, but only because you asked for complete privacy." Jonathan closed the folder without opening it. "Good. I am not going there to make headlines. I am going there because one child reminded me what leadership should look like." A short time later, a simple black sport utility vehicle pulled quietly into the visitor parking lot outside the school. There were no reporters, no photographers, and no public announcement. Jonathan stepped out wearing a navy jacket instead of an expensive business suit, hoping to draw as little attention as possible. Principal Denise Harper greeted him warmly and escorted him through the front office. As they walked down the hallway, colorful student artwork covered the walls. Jonathan slowed his pace to admire drawings of families, dreams, and handwritten essays about kindness. One picture showed a child helping another tie a shoe. Another showed neighbors planting flowers together. The hallway reflected values that reminded him of Caleb far more than any corporate mission statement ever had. "Caleb is in Mrs. Parker's fourth grade classroom," Principal Harper explained. "He is an exceptional student. Quiet, respectful, always willing to help classmates." Jonathan smiled softly. "That sounds exactly like the young man I met." Before entering the classroom, Principal Harper paused. "May I ask why this visit matters so much?" Jonathan looked through the small window in the classroom door where Caleb sat carefully organizing books for another student who had arrived late. He answered without taking his eyes away from the scene. "Because people often reward talent after the world notices it. Character deserves to be recognized long before applause arrives." Principal Harper nodded thoughtfully. She quietly opened the classroom door, and Mrs. Parker greeted them with a welcoming smile. The students looked up with curious expressions as the unfamiliar visitor entered. Caleb glanced toward the doorway, and his eyes widened in surprise. Jonathan smiled warmly, but did not interrupt the lesson. Instead, he waited patiently beside the teacher's desk until the morning attendance was finished. As the room settled into complete silence, every child watched with quiet curiosity. None of them knew why one of the country's most successful businessmen had come to their small classroom. Jonathan knew that what he was about to say would not only honor Caleb's honesty, but also remind every child in that room that the greatest achievements often begin with a single decision to do the right thing when no one is watching. The classroom remained completely still as Jonathan stepped to the front beside Mrs. Parker's desk. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting long golden lines across rows of neatly arranged desks where every student watched with quiet curiosity. Caleb sat near the middle of the room, his hands folded together on top of his notebook, looking as surprised as everyone else. Jonathan smiled warmly before speaking. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Whitmore, and I came here today because one of your classmates taught me something I should have remembered long ago." A few children exchanged puzzled glances, while Mrs. Parker nodded encouragingly. Jonathan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and carefully removed the familiar leather wallet. "A few days ago I lost this without realizing it. Inside was money, important cards, and things I could not easily replace. I never expected to see it again." He paused, allowing the students to follow the story. Then one remarkable young man found it. Jonathan turned toward Caleb with a gentle smile. Instead of keeping it, he walked 5 miles to return it himself. He did not ask for a reward. He did not expect recognition. He simply believed it was the right thing to do. The room became even quieter. Several students slowly turned to look at Caleb, whose cheeks grew warm with embarrassment. He lowered his eyes, wishing the attention would pass as quickly as it had arrived. Jonathan continued softly. "When I offered to thank him with money, he refused. He told me that if he accepted payment for doing the right thing, Then honesty would become something he sold instead of something he lived. Mrs. Parker placed a hand gently over her heart. Principal Harper smiled proudly from the back of the classroom. Even Emily, standing quietly beside the doorway, felt her eyes begin to glisten. Jonathan looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every student. Many people believe success begins when someone becomes rich or famous. I have learned that true success begins much earlier. It begins with choices no one else sees. Returning something that is not yours. Keeping a promise. Helping someone without expecting anything in return. Those choices build the kind of character that can never be bought. He carefully placed the wallet on Mrs. Parker's desk before reaching once more into his jacket. This time he unfolded Caleb's handwritten note. I asked Caleb for permission to share these words because I believe every student deserves to hear them. Caleb gave a shy nod. Jonathan read slowly. I did not count your money because I did not want my eyes to think about keeping it. I only looked for your name so I could bring it back. I hope you are not worried anymore. When he finished reading, the classroom remained silent for several heartbeats. Then one student began clapping. Another quickly joined. Within seconds, the entire room filled with warm applause that echoed down the hallway. Caleb looked around in complete surprise. He had never imagined that the simple decision to return a wallet would lead to this moment. Jonathan smiled as he watched the boy receiving something far more meaningful than praise. He was witnessing the respect earned by quiet integrity, the kind that grows not from wealth or recognition, but from doing what is right even when nobody expects anyone to. Notice, the applause gradually faded, but the feeling it created remained inside the classroom long after every pair of hands became still again. Caleb looked down at his desk, overwhelmed by attention he had never wanted. Mrs. Parker smiled warmly and rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder before inviting everyone to sit. Jonathan waited until the room grew quiet once more. There is one more reason I came today, he said gently. Every student leaned forward with curiosity. Jonathan looked directly at Caleb before speaking again. When I first met Caleb, I thought I needed to thank him for returning my wallet. After spending time with him and his grandmother, I realized that what he truly deserves is not a reward for one good deed. He deserves opportunities that will help him continue becoming the remarkable person he already is. Emily stepped forward carrying a simple blue folder instead of an oversized presentation or ceremonial display. Jonathan accepted it and carefully placed it on Caleb's desk. Caleb, this folder contains something that belongs to your future. Beginning today, the Whitmore Foundation will provide a full educational scholarship for every year of your schooling, including college, if that is the path you choose. It will also provide books, school supplies, mentoring, and every opportunity you need to pursue your dreams. The classroom fell completely silent once again. Caleb blinked several times as though he had misunderstood the words. Sir, he whispered softly, that is too much. Jonathan smiled with gentle understanding. No, Caleb, it is not payment for your honesty. Your honesty cannot be purchased. This is an investment in the future of a young man whose character has already proven stronger than circumstances. Tears shimmered in Mrs. Parker's eyes while Principal Harper quietly reached for a tissue. Emily watched Caleb carefully open the folder with trembling hands. Inside were neatly prepared documents, a handwritten letter from Jonathan, and a bookmark bearing a single sentence. Character opens doors that money never can. Caleb looked up, unable to find the right words. Jonathan noticed his hesitation and knelt beside the desk so they were at the same eye level. There is only one thing I hope you will promise me, he said. Caleb nodded. Yes, sir. Jonathan smiled. One day, when life gives you the chance to help someone else, remember how this moment feels. Pass kindness forward, just as you passed honesty forward when you returned my wallet. Caleb's face brightened with a quiet smile. I promise, sir. At that very moment, the classroom clock quietly marked the beginning of a new hour, though for everyone inside the room it felt like the beginning of something much greater. Jonathan stood and looked around at the students once more. Every one of you has the ability to change another person's life, he said. It does not begin with having money. It begins with choosing integrity, compassion, and courage in ordinary moments. As sunlight continued streaming through the classroom windows, Caleb carefully closed the blue folder and held it close against his chest. The scholarship represented more than an education. It represented trust, hope, and a future built not upon luck, but upon the simple decision a young boy had made on an ordinary afternoon when he chose to return something that never belonged to him. Several months passed, and the seasons quietly changed across Georgia. The flower boxes outside Evelyn's little white house bloomed with fresh colors once again, while the patched roof that had worried her for years had finally been repaired through a community home restoration program Jonathan had helped organize without placing his own name on it. Caleb never learned who had quietly arranged the volunteers. He simply thanked every person who showed up carrying ladders, paintbrushes, and willing hands. His life looked different in many ways, yet the most important parts remained exactly the same. Every morning, he still greeted the crossing guard with a smile. He still helped classmates carry heavy books. He still visited neighbors after school to rake leaves, carry groceries, or walk their dogs whenever they needed an extra hand. The scholarship had opened doors, but it had never changed the person walking through them. Jonathan noticed that every time they met, their conversations became a treasured tradition. Sometimes they shared breakfast before school. Other times they simply walked through the neighborhood together, talking about books, dreams, and the people who had shaped their lives. Jonathan often admitted that he believed he was mentoring Caleb, yet deep inside he knew the opposite was just as true. One quiet afternoon, Caleb visited Jonathan's office for the first time. The headquarters overlooked the city skyline through towering windows, and polished marble reflected the afternoon sunlight across the spacious lobby. Employees greeted Jonathan respectfully as he led Caleb into his private office. Among family photographs, business awards, and framed newspaper articles sat a simple leather wallet displayed inside a small glass case. Caleb recognized it immediately. "You kept it," he said with a surprised smile. Jonathan nodded. "I certainly did." Caleb looked puzzled. Most people would put it back in their pocket. Jonathan walked over to the display and gently rested one hand against the glass. "Whenever I begin believing that success is measured only by numbers, I look at this wallet and remember the day a young boy reminded me that character is worth far more than everything it once carried." Caleb smiled quietly before looking down at his own sneakers. They were no longer held together with patches. Thanks to the scholarship, he now wore a comfortable new pair suitable for school and sports. Yet inside his backpack, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, he still carried the old worn sneakers that had walked 5 miles on the evening everything changed. Evelyn had encouraged him to keep them. "Those shoes carried more than your feet," she had once said. "They carried your values." Years later, visitors would often ask Jonathan why an ordinary wallet occupied such a special place in his office. He always answered with the same quiet smile. "Because it reminds me that the richest investment I ever made began the day I stopped measuring wealth by money." And whenever Caleb looked at the worn sneakers resting safely inside his closet at home, he remembered that true journeys are never measured only by miles. They are measured by the choices made along the way. One ordinary afternoon, a boy chose honesty over convenience, and a billionaire chose humility over pride. Neither of them realized it at the time, but both walked away carrying something far more valuable than a wallet. They carried a lasting reminder that kindness, when guided by character, has the power to change not only one life, but every life it quietly touches afterward.